Welcome and thank you for standing by. All participants are in a listen-only mode for the duration of today's conference. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Angie Werner. Angie, you may begin.
Great, thank you, Anthony. Hi, everybody. My name is Angie Werner, and I'm with CDC's National Environmental Public Health Tracking Program. First, I wanted to thank the census subject matter experts for taking the time to speak with us today and share their expertise. I also wanted to thank all of you for joining the webinar. Now I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Nathan Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today, and thank you, Anthony and Angie, for the warm welcome and introduction. Thanks again for being with us here today. We have a number of excellent topics to discuss related to geography, race and ethnicity, population estimates, the American Community Survey, and disclosure avoidance. I'll kick us off by discussing some geographic change information which may be of interest to you. Next slide, please. So before I get into more specifics on our geographies, I wanted to provide a little bit of a brief overview on the full complement of data maintained by the Geography Division's Geographic Support Program and why that is so important. At the Census Bureau, geospatial information builds the foundation for our data collection, processing, tabulation, and dissemination across many programs, some of which you are, I'm sure, very familiar with. The decennial census, which occurs every 10 years, and most recently in the year 2020, the American Community Survey, the economic census, and other programs, including the generation of population and poverty estimates. These Census Bureau programs rely on an accurate repository of geospatial information to ensure that we're inviting the right addresses and businesses to participate in our censuses and surveys, to match their addresses to an exact geographic location, to conduct in-person follow-up on an as-needed basis, to tabulate data to the correct geographic area, and of course, to release accurate statistics at different levels of geography. Next slide, please. Our repository of geospatial information at the Census Bureau is called the MAF-TIGER system. MAF is the master address file, and TIGER is our national geospatial database. This system, the MAF-TIGER system, contains over 8 million unique geographic areas, including legal, administrative, and statistical areas, some of which I will provide a brief overview of a little bit later in the slides. Legal boundaries for approximately 40,000 units of government, approximately 7 million miles of roads and other features, and then structure points for over 90% of residential addresses for the 2020 census, which is something that we're very proud of and continue to strive to improve upon each year leading up to the next census for 2030. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we're currently maintain over 8 million unique geographies. Those are legal, administrative, and statistical. The graphic on the screen shows the counts and types of geography as of the 2020 census and the 2020 island areas census. We maintain our geographies throughout the decade through programs conducted internally at the Census Bureau, but also through a suite of partnership programs where we invite tribal, state, and local governments to participate and provide us updates. These include our annual Boundary and Annexation Survey, or BASS survey, which provides nearly 40,000 governments the opportunity to review and update their geographic boundaries, names, and functioning statuses each year. And we do this because our partners, the tribal, state, and local government partners, know their data best, and they are best suited to provide us these updates on an ongoing basis throughout the decade. By itself, the statistical information produced by the Census Bureau is important, but without geography, data users aren't able to see the entire picture. Geography is what provides meaning and context to our statistical data. By tabulating census data at different levels, of geography, a wide range of stakeholders can then utilize our data to make decisions and take action throughout the decade. Next slide, please. So a few slides ago, I mentioned that we conduct a suite of partnership programs throughout the decade to maintain the MapTiger system. These include our annual boundary and annexation survey, our school district review program, which we conduct in partnership with the Department of Education to update elementary, secondary, and unified school districts throughout the nation. Our Participant Statistical Areas program, which is conducted once a decade to update statistical geographies. The Redistricting Data Program, which is conducted in various phases throughout the decade. Our Local Update of Census Addresses operation, which is a legally mandated operation that the Census Bureau conducts once a decade to provide all functioning governments the opportunity to review the Census Bureau's Title 13 protected address list for their jurisdiction prior to conducting the decennial census. And lastly, the New Construction Program, which is again another example of a once a decade program that's conducted just prior to the decennial census and is like a final opportunity for governments to provide exactly what the name of the program says, new construction or new build addresses just prior to conducting the census to ensure that we have the most accurate and complete master address file as possible. Next slide, please. So some recent significant changes that you may or may not be aware of. At the request of the state of Connecticut, the Census Bureau adopted the state's 9 planning regions as county equivalent geographic units in 2022 for data collection, tabulation, and dissemination. The state's 9 planning regions now replace the previous 8 counties, which ceased to function as governmental and administrative entities in 1960. There are a number of links here on the slide that can provide some additional background information regarding how this change was communicated, how it came to be, and then also some additional product information, including crosswalks from the previous 8 counties to the new 9 counties or planning regions. Next slide, please. All right, and then we get into our annual boundary and annexation survey. So most recently, we have completed the 2023 boundary annexation survey. The boundary and annexation survey kicks off each calendar year in January, and governments have until the end of May to provide their legal boundary updates, in addition to feature updates as well. This year, we reached out to approximately 39,000 governments and got a response from over 30,000 legal boundary updates from more than 3,000 participating tribal, state, and local governments. The upcoming Tiger Line product release that the Census Bureau produces each fall will include over 5,000 legal boundary updates. So these are annexations, de-annexations, new incorporations, and dissolutions that will be represented in the upcoming Tiger Line product this fall. And this is an annual survey, so governments will be, all the governments that do participate each year will receive an invitation to participate in the 2024 BAS in January of 24. Next slide, please. All right. So now I'd like to just do a little bit more of a deep dive into a sampling of some of the geographies that we maintain. Given our limited time that we have together today, I'm only going to touch on a few, but there are links at the end of the slides for the geographic information that provide much more information that will be available to you on census.gov. And I'm more than happy to help out with any questions if you want to reach out directly to me. My contact information is included at the end of the slide deck. Next slide, please. So first, a level of government that I'm sure we're all very familiar with, counties. These are the primary division of a state or a state equivalent area. Most states use the term county, but others such as Alaska, use the term borough. In Louisiana, it's parish, and in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, it's municipio. For most states, counties are the primary administrative division. Governments have the opportunity to update their county boundaries each year through the annual Boundary Annexation Survey. Also, at the end of each decade, there is another program that I didn't mention on the previous slides called the Boundary Validation Program. This is a sort of like a final opportunity prior to conducting the census for highest elected officials, so your mayors, governors, to review the legal boundary representation that the Census Bureau has and request an update or sign off on it as accurate. And as I mentioned, most recently we had an entire state's worth of change for county representation in the state of Connecticut when we changed to the 9 planning regions from the old defunct 8 counties. Next slide, please. Next, we have our minor civil divisions, or as we like to refer to them internally at the Census Bureau, MCDs. MCDs are the primary governmental or administrative division of a county in many states. MCDs in the United States, Puerto Rico, and the island areas represent many different kinds of legal entities with a wide variety of governmental functions. The Census Bureau recognizes MCDs in 29 states. And again, just like with our county boundaries, these are updated annually through the Boundary and Annexation Survey. Next slide, please. All right, next, one that everyone is very familiar with, but perhaps via a different name. So these are our incorporated places, something that you may be familiar with as a city, a town, a village, or a borough. An incorporated place is established to provide governmental functions for a concentration of people. These again are updated annually through our Boundary and Annexation Survey. And in addition to legally defined incorporated places, we also delineate census designated places, which are statistical equivalents without that legal definition behind them. And the census designated places are also, just like the incorporated places, updated annually through the Boundary Annexation Survey. Next slide, please. All right, now we get into some of the statistical boundaries that we maintain at the Census Bureau. So first, census tracts. So tracts are small, relatively permanent statistical subdivisions of a county or equivalent entity that are updated by local participants prior to each decennial census as a part of the Participant Statistical Areas program that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. The primary purpose of census tracts is to provide a stable set of geographic units for the presentation of statistical data that the Census Bureau produces. Tracts generally have a population between 1,200 and 8,000 people, with an optimum size right down the middle of approximately 4,000 people. A tract generally covers a continuous area. However, the spatial size of a census tract can vary widely depending on the density of settlement for a given area. Next slide, please. Next, we have our census blocks. These are statistical areas bounded by visible features such as streets, roads, streams, railroad tracks, etc. Generally, census blocks are very small in area. For example, a block in a city bounded on all sides by a street. Census blocks in suburban and rural areas, though, may be large and irregular and bounded by a variety of features such as roads and streams and or transmission lines. In remote areas, census blocks may encompass hundreds of square miles, and census blocks, nest within all other tabulated census geographic entities and are the basis for all tabulated data that the Census Bureau produces. Next slide, please. Now we get into our American Indian areas. So American Indian areas are areas that have been set aside by the United States for the use of tribes, the exterior boundaries of which are more particularly defined in the final tribal treaties, agreements, executive orders, federal statutes, secretarial orders, or judicial determinations. the Census Bureau tabulates population and housing data for several different entities that can collectively be referred to as American Indian areas. AIA is an overarching term that generally encompasses several different types of tribal areas. So we have both legal and statistical tribal-related geographies, the legal updated annually through the Boundary and Annexation Survey, and the statistical once a decade through the Participant Statistical Areas Program. Next slide, please. All right. So just, coming to a conclusion on our geography information and information related to geographic changes, there are some additional resources available for you related to products and other publications regarding the Census Bureau's Geographic Support Program and subsequent maps, mapping applications, and shapefiles. Next slide, please. And some additional information here related to the programs that we conduct, the entities that we maintain, and the overall, geographic support program, and the things that we are working on right now through this decade that will be available to you via the published strategic plan, which is linked there at the bottom of this table. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague at the Census Bureau, Ali, who will take it from there.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Ali Karitz, and it is my pleasure to give you an overview of the improvements to the 2020 Census Race and Hispanic Origin question designs, data processing, and coding procedures. We'll start off with the 2020 Census ethnicity and race questions, which are shown on this slide. The race and ethnicity question format designs for the 2020 census adhere to the 1997 Office of Management and Budget Race and Ethnicity Standards. The OMB minimum categories for data on race and ethnicity for federal statistics, program administrative reporting, and civil rights compliance reporting are defined as follows. The OMB requires 2 minimum categories for data on ethnicity, Hispanic or Latino, and not Hispanic or Latino. The OMB requires 5 minimum categories for race, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white, which includes Middle Eastern and North African responses. People may also select multiple races. The Census Bureau is also required by Congress to use the category some other race in the decennial census. The Census Bureau did not use a combined question format for collecting race and ethnicity data, as the OMB standards require the use of 2 separate questions on ethnicity and on race for self-response. Next slide, please. We made updates to the question design based on feedback that stakeholders, advisors, and tribal leaders provided to us and that fit within the U.S. Office of Management and Budget guidelines. For example, we now have write-in response areas for the white and Black or African American racial categories, which allowed us to collect detailed data on white responses, including detailed Middle Eastern and North African responses, as well as detailed Black or African American responses, such as Nigerian and Jamaican. We added 6 examples for white, Black or African American, and American Indian or Alaska Native write-in lines to help solicit detailed responses. We also updated the Guamanian or Chamorro checkbox to Chamorro only, which allows us to report separate data on the Chamorro and Guamanian populations. Next slide, please. This slide provides a summary of the processing and improvements made to the 2020 Census Race and Hispanic questions. In the 2010 Census, we only captured the first 3 characters of written responses to the race and ethnicity questions and coded up to 2 write-in responses for each write-in. Over the past decade, our research has found that people were reporting longer and more detailed responses to the questions. For the 2020 Census, we wanted to reflect more fully and accurately the complex details of how people identify their race and ethnicity. Based on further research, testing, and outreach throughout the decade, we changed how we captured and coded responses for the 2020 Census Race and Hispanic Origin questions. We increased the number of characters captured from 30 to 200, which allowed us to capture and fully recognize longer write-in responses. Instead of prioritizing multiple responses into only 2 codes, we coded up to 6 detailed responses for each write-in area. This increase effectively gave all responses an equal opportunity to be coded into one of the 6 major race categories. It also simplified our coding work that removed duplicate or repetitive terms to reduce responses to 2 codes. We fully tested these coding and question changes in the 2015 National Content Test and finalized them in the 2018 Content Test, or Census Test rather. Next slide, please. These examples illustrate how a response was coded in 2010 versus 2020. The first example shows that in the 2010 census, the response of Mexican American Indian and Portuguese and African American was not fully coded because it was longer than 30 characters. Only the text outlined by the red box was captured and coded in the 2010 census. The additional text was not captured. Therefore, the responses of Portuguese and African American were not able to be coded. The second example shows that if the same write-in response was provided in 2020, all of the text outlined by the red box was captured. This enabled all 3 terms of Mexican American Indian, Portuguese, and African American to be recognized and coded. Next slide, please. In another major improvement for the 2020 census, we used a single code list for coding data from the Hispanic origin question and the race question. In previous censuses, we used 2 separate code lists, one for the Hispanic origin question and one for the race question. Previously, these code lists focus on providing codes for either detailed Hispanic groups or detailed race groups. By combining these code lists, we expanded the number of detailed groups that could be coded in each question. Next slide, please. We made several enhancements to our 2020 census Hispanic origin and race code list that allowed us to more accurately collect, process, and tabulate data. For example, we were able to tabulate data on detailed white responses, including terms such as English, Lebanese, and Cajun, as well as detailed Black or African American responses, such as Somali and Haitian, due to the inclusion of new write-in areas. Data for individual American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages are shown, eliminating the tribal groupings used in 2010. Nearly 20 new detailed Asian codes were added, including the reclassification of Central Asian groups, such as Afghan and Uzbek, from white to Asian, Sikh being tabulated as a distinct group, and the addition of more than 10 others, including Malay, Pashtun, and Timorese. 10 new detailed Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander codes were added, such as New Caledonian, French Polynesian, and Maori. Detailed responses to the some other race write-in area were tabulated for the first time, meaning you can now find data on groups such as the Brazilian population. Based on research and consultation with experts and stakeholders, we added a new code for Afro-Latino and reclassified Garifuna from the American Indian and Alaska Native racial category to the Hispanic category. This is the first time these responses were tabulated from the Hispanic origin question. To summarize, next slide, please. To summarize, for the 2020 census, we provided dedicated write-in response areas and examples for each major race and ethnicity category. And in consultation with outside experts, stakeholders, and tribal leaders, we substantially reviewed, updated, and enhanced our race and ethnicity code list to reflect the myriad responses that people report. These improvements allowed people to more accurately report their detailed racial and ethnic identities, and they sharpened our collection, coding, and tabulation of disaggregated racial and ethnic groups. And this was critical because people reported more detailed identities than ever before. In 2010, we processed about 55 million write-in responses, and this rose to 350 million in 2020. People took the opportunity to tell us about their detailed racial and ethnic identities, and this is what the data from the recently released Detailed Demographic and Housing Characteristics File A, or Detailed DHCA, illuminates for communities and groups across the nation. Next slide, please. There are several products from the 2020 census that include data on race and ethnicity. Population counts and data on voting age population for major race and ethnic groups, such as Hispanic, Asian, and Black or African American, were released in the redistricting summary file in August 2021. The population and housing characteristics on major race and ethnic groups were released in the Demographic Profile and the Demographic and Housing Characteristics File, or DHC, in May 2023. The Detailed DHCA and the Detailed DHCB are the successors to the Summary File 2 and the American Indian and Alaska Native Summary Files that were released in the 2010 census. They provide data for disaggregated race and ethnic groups in American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages. The Detailed DHCA was released last month, and the Detailed DHCB is planned for release in September of 2024. Lastly, the Supplemental DHC will also include additional population and housing characteristics about the major race and ethnic groups. This is also planned for release in September of 2024. Next slide, please. The Detailed DHCA provides total population counts and sex and age statistics for 300 detailed racial and ethnic groups, such as German, Lebanese, Chinese, Native Hawaiian, and Mexican, as well as 1,187 detailed American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages, like the Navajo Nation. The Detailed DHCA uses an adaptive design that allows us to provide more detailed statistics for groups with larger populations, while at the same time ensuring sufficient confidentiality protections. This product includes data for the nation, states, counties, census tracts, places in American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian areas. Total population counts are available for detailed groups at the nation and state levels, regardless of population size. And total population counts are also available for groups with populations of at least 22 in other geographies. This product also provides sex by age statistics for selected age categories for groups that meet certain population thresholds. And the Detailed DHCA came out on September 21st. Next slide, please. We release ACS characteristics for race and ethnic groups every year, but the 2017 to 2021 ACS selected population tables and American Indian and Alaska Native tables, release that came out in June, is an even broader release that covers a 5-year period and offers social, economic, housing, and demographic characteristics. Statistics are published for an individual group in a particular geographic area if it had at least 50 people that completed the 2017 to 2021 survey. There are 399 population groups in the 2017 to 2021 SPT that had a national population estimate of at least 7,000, and 1,059 population groups in the 2017 to 2021 AIANT that had a national population estimate of at least 100. This is the third time the Census Bureau has released these detailed 5-year ACS estimates. And that concludes my overview of improvements to the 2020 Census Race and Hispanic Origin Question Designs, Data Processing, and Coding Procedures. Thank you, and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Christine, now.
Thank you, Allie, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here today to tell you all about our Population Estimates program. I'm Christine Hartley, the Assistant Division Chief, and I oversee the program in the Population Estimates and Projections area of the Population Division. Today, I'm going to begin with some high-level detail on the program, our products, a little bit about our methodology, and then I'm going to highlight some significant recent changes to our estimates. So the Pop Estimates program, perfect. The Pop Estimates program is responsible for developing annual estimates products to satisfy a legal mandate to Congress as per Title 13, Section 181. These data serve a wide array of purposes, including being used as denominators for many key statistical indicators. They're also used as survey controls for numerous surveys, such as the American Community Survey, the Current Population Survey, and the National Survey of Family Growth. And they factor into the distribution of trillions of dollars in federal funding every year. Every year that we produce our estimates, we build a time series that starts at the date of the most recent decennial census and extends through the vintage year, which represents the latest year of estimates available. So vintage is the word that we use to designate that we're referring to a time series of estimates created with a consistent population starting point and methodology. The latest estimates that we published are for July 1st, 2022, also known as Vintage 2022, although we have estimates on our website dating back to 1900. Next slide. We've already heard from Nate on census geography, and you can see here the levels of geography that the Pop Estimates program estimates for, ranging from the nation down to cities and towns. Next slide. For each series of estimates, our products are released on a rolling basis. So last June, we published the final data for Vintage 2022, and that means that we are already well underway preparing for our next estimate series, Vintage 2023, and we'll begin to release that in December. On this slide, you can see our expected release schedule, and it's also available on our website. Next slide. Now for some info on our methods. For POP estimates at the county level of geography and above, the POP estimates program utilizes the cohort component method to measure population changes since the last census, which you can see here in blue as the population base, through the use of a variety of administrative records and survey data on births, deaths, and migration, otherwise known as the components of population change. The blue population base generally represents the date of the last decennial census. So for our current series of estimates, we begin with the April 1st, 2020 population, which represents a combination of data from the 2020 census and other sources, which I'll be discussing more momentarily. Next slide. Our estimates of housing units are also produced using a component-based method that starts with the most recent census and then uses a variety of survey and administrative data to estimate change in the housing stock, specifically in terms of building permits, estimates of non-permitted construction, mobile home shipments, and estimates of housing loss. So we use 2020 census housing unit counts for our housing unit base, which is also shown here in blue. Next slide. And finally, at the sub-county geography level, the population estimates for cities and towns are created by distributing the county population estimates to each place within the county based on that place's ratio of household pop to total housing units. We add that to an estimate of the population in group quarters to get the total resident population. So you saw on the previous slide how we derive our housing unit estimate. Meanwhile, our household and group quarters base population, seen in this equation, are drawn from the results of the 2020 census. Next slide. So our general methodological approach each year is to revise the entire time series of estimates beginning at the date of the last census and up to the vintage year. And then each new vintage that we put out supersedes any overlapping estimates from previous years. There are 3 types of updates that we may incorporate into each new vintage. First, the base population is updated each year to reflect legal boundary changes or other geographic updates. It may also be updated due to the outcomes of official census programs, such as count question resolution or the post-census group quarters review, or changes to the method of how we estimate the base population. Then, as more recent or complete data become available, such as births, deaths, or the components that we use for our housing unit estimates, we use those to update the estimates of the components of change. We may also revise methods of how we estimate the various components. And what you'll see is that data updates are more likely to affect estimates for the most recent years of the time series, while method revisions generally affect the time series cumulatively from the census date forward. Finally, we may improve our method of tying all of the components together and generating the estimates. And this type of change also affects the series from the census date forward. Next slide. For vintage 2021, the impact of COVID-19 on the 2020 census, combined with changes resulting from the modernized disclosure avoidance framework, meant that the 2020 census detail that the POP estimates program needed to serve as the base from which to build our vintage 2021 estimates for counties and higher levels of geography was not available to us. So for the first time, we needed to create some kind of alternative estimates base that was not exclusively drawn from the most recent decennial census. The result was the blended base, which provided an April 1st, 2020 estimates base by integrating 3 sources of data. The vintage 2020 estimates, which was the last series that we had built off the 2010 census, and that's represented here in blue. The 2020 census total population for counties from the PL 94-171 redistricting file, which is in red, and the national 2020 demographic analysis, or DA estimates, by age and sex, represented in green, which are national level estimates for April 1st, 2020, developed by the POP estimates program using an alternative administrative records-based methodology. And these estimates are used to estimate coverage actually in the decennial census. So this graphic represents the original vintage 2021 blended base, and this proved to be handy and adaptable framework. Of particular importance, though, is the fact that in this model, we are using totals from the census, but demographic detail from vintage 2020 NDA. Next slide. Beyond being adaptable, it turned out that the blended base presented some distinct benefits. In particular, the age data in the base aren't affected by the age heaping that's apparent in the results of the 2020 census at the national level, and which you can see here on this population pyramid in red. If you're not familiar with this tool, what we have here is population in millions on the x-axis by single year of age up the y-axis, with males featured on the left and females featured on the right. Age heaping is a phenomenon that occurs when the population counts for ages ending in preferred digits, such as 0 and 5, are higher than would be expected based on known birth, death, and migration patterns. So that explains those spikes in the red 2020 census line. And then by using the 2020 DA age and sex distribution in the blended base, there was a somewhat mitigating effect on the persistent undercount of young children in the census data, because the vital records that we use to inform the 2020 DA age and sex data provide excellent coverage of this population, which translated into more children aged 0 to 4 in the blended base than in the census, which if you click to the next slide, you can see here where the blue arrows are pointing, because the red census line falls beneath the blue blended base. And also we ended up with more kids ages 10 to 14, if you click again, who had been undercounted in the 2010 census and then aged forward in our cohort component method. So you see here that the blue blended baseline diverges from the green vintage 2020 line. Next slide. The vintage 2021 blended base was very much a response to circumstances, and it was produced on a fairly condensed timeline. So once it was completed, we were able to begin looking for ways that we could improve upon it. So the vintage 2022 iteration featured a number of processing improvements, and it also included expanded age data from demographic analysis. And instead of just the total resident population from the census, we pulled in 2020 census totals for the household population and for the group quarters population by the 7 major facility types. And this enabled us to incorporate geographic changes. And in the same manner that we always look for ways to improve our components data and methods from vintage to vintage, we planned a similar approach moving forward for our base population. But this new blended base approach opened a door to building a better April 1st, 2020 estimate at the same time that coverage measures from the 2020 census were raising questions about the quality of the April 1st, 2020 count. So the results of the census couldn't be changed, but the question was, what could we do to address coverage issues in the base population? So to tackle this, next slide. The Census Bureau assembled a cross-directorate team of internal experts known as the Base Evaluation and Research Team, or BERT. And we've been tasked with determining the feasibility of taking coverage measures from the 2020 post-enumeration survey, DA, and other sources into account in the development of the population estimates. Specifically, moving forward, the BERT research is going to inform decisions about what 2020 census data are used in the blended base. Because as you may recall, right now we're not using any of the age, sex, race, or Hispanic origin detail. And also the team will determine whether there are adjustments that can be made to the census data used in the base. Although it is slightly too soon to confirm how recommendations from BERT are going to affect our upcoming vintage 2023 estimates, we expect to be sharing that information, probably within a month of now. Next slide. However, there's one outcome of the research that we can share. It was made public when the 2020 Census Demographic and Housing Characteristics file was released in May. Earlier, I showed you that population pyramid in which the red line representing the 2020 census was spiky due to the impact of age heaping. Well, the BERT research revealed that heaping is greatest where people only reported an age on the census and did not include a date of birth, especially if that age was reported by a proxy. So we refer to these as age-only responses. Now BERT is exploring ways to smooth the heaping that's resulted from these cases to produce data that could then potentially be used in our April 1st, 2020 estimate space. However, the earliest we could potentially incorporate those data into the blended base would be for vintage 2024. Next slide. And what's next for the blended base? Well, as I mentioned, the findings from the BERT research will largely determine what changes are being implemented for this upcoming vintage and beyond. And this work is definitely a major priority among census leadership. So switching from this approach, from where we take the census, at its word to one where we're building the best base that we can, is a very exciting paradigm shift for us. And it's one that we will continue to work through carefully to ensure equitable and methodologically sound results. And of course, we will keep all of you updated regarding our progress and future changes to the estimates. In fact, you can stay tuned for a public webinar in late November or early December, highlighting the updates that we do apply to our vintage 2023 estimates. That is everything that I have, although I've included some contact information and sources on the final slide of the presentation. Thank you very much, and I will hand things over to Nicole.
All right, thank you very much, Christine. Hello, my name is Nicole Scanello. I'm the Assistant Division Chief for Communications in the American Community Survey Office, or the ACS. And first, I'll provide a high-level overview of the survey. Next slide, please. So the ACS is the nation's most current, reliable, and accessible data source for local statistics on critical planning topics such as age, children, veterans, commuting, and income. The survey samples approximately 3.5 million addresses each year, and the data are collected continuously throughout the year to produce annual social, economic, housing, and demographic estimates. The data collected through the ACS help inform how trillions of dollars in federal funds are distributed each year. ACS estimates cover more than 40 topics and support more than 300 known federal uses and countless non-federal uses. The Census Bureau typically releases 3 sets of data estimates from the ACS each year in the form of 1-year and 5-year period data sets, as well as 1-year supplemental estimates. Next slide, please. So this is probably not surprising, but the ACS encountered data collection challenges in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The ACS uses a multi-mode data collection strategy with multiple mailings to get responses from all segments of the population. This multi-mode data collection strategy includes collecting data via the internet, paper questionnaires, and in-person interviews with Census Bureau field representatives. Given the stay-at-home orders and the health concerns, both for Census Bureau employees and the public during the pandemic, we were unable to fully utilize all 3 data collection modes. Given this, we were unable to collect information from certain segments of the population in 2020. The people who did respond to the survey had significantly different social, economic, and housing characteristics from those who didn't, resulting in non-response bias in the data. So for example, people who responded to the 2020 ACS had higher income, higher education, and were more likely to own their home. So while all surveys have non-response bias, our standard methods for mitigating the non-response bias were insufficient for the 2020 data year. We released a set of experimental estimates in 2020 rather than the standard ACS 1-year estimates. And we also released a set of public use microdata sample files, or PUMS files, with experimental weights. And for more information on the 2020 ACS 1-year data and the related quality metrics, please refer to the analytical report referenced on this slide, which we released in October of 2021. Next slide, please. The 2020 ACS 1-year experimental release includes 54 tables, similar in format to the ACS 1-year supplemental tables. The tables cover social, economic, housing, and demographic characteristics and are available for the nation, states, and the District of Columbia. The experimental weighting methodology does not apply to Puerto Rico, so there are no experimental estimates for Puerto Rico. A technical working paper detailing the methodology for the experimental weights was also released. The paper includes a limited set of 2019 and 2020 ACS estimates with the experimental weighting methods applied to help data users understand the impact of the methods on the weights in a non-pandemic year to provide context for year-to-year comparisons. As I mentioned before, we also released the 2020 ACS 1-year PUMS file with experimental weights. The experimental products and the supporting information can be found on the experimental data page on the American Community Survey website, which is census.gov /ACS. The URL for the page is at the bottom of the slide for the specific experimental page. The data tables and PUMS files are not available on data.census.gov or in the application programming interface or API, which are our traditional data dissemination methods. So you have to access the data through this page. And I should clarify, though, that we did release a standard 5-year product for the 2016 to 2020 ACS 5-year. Next slide, please. So in terms of using this experimental product, the Census Bureau encourages data users to determine whether the data are suitable for their particular use. We do not recommend comparing the 2020 ACS 1-year experimental estimates with our standard ACS estimates or the decennial census, or comparing the 2020 1-year PUMS data with standard pre-tabulated products or PUMS-based estimates from other years. The experimental data should be used with caution because they may not meet all of our quality standards. In addition, estimates for the public use microdata areas, or PUMAs, should be used with caution because the experimental, that word's getting me, because the experimental weights were not optimized to produce estimates for those areas. Next slide. Now I'd like to discuss some of the changes that occurred with our 2021 ACS data releases. First, I'll discuss population controls for the 2021 ACS 1-year release. ACS data are controlled so that the number of housing units and people in certain categories are consistent with the Census Bureau's official estimates from the Population Estimates Program, which you just heard Christine talk about. Due to delays in the 2020 census processing, the 2010 to 2020 intercensus estimates were not released in 2021 as planned. The standard 2021 post-census estimates could not be produced with the standard methodology, so they were not fully informed by the 2020 census. The 2021 ACS data products used the vintage 2021 blended base population estimates, again, which Christine just talked about a minute ago. In the blended base, at the national level, population totals come from the decennial census, age and sex detail comes from demographic analysis, and race and Hispanic origin detail comes from the vintage 2020 estimates. And the URL at the bottom of this slide will take you to a user note that contains more information about this change. Next slide. The population controls for the ACS 5-year product are the average of the population estimates across the 5-year period. In most years, the ACS simply uses the latest release of post-census estimates, which are produced for the most recent census forward for each of the 5 years. However, if the period straddles a decennial year, then the intercensus estimates are used for the years prior to the decennial, and the post-census estimates are used for the decennial year forward. Intercensus estimates form a time series starting from the preceding census and ending at the current census, so they are informed by both censuses. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk a little bit about the POP controls specifically for the 2017 to 2021 ACS 5-year estimates, which are the most current set of 5-year estimates available. As I mentioned before, due to delays in the 2020 census processing, the 2010 through 2020 intercensus estimates were not available for the 2017 to 2021 ACS 5-year product. So we needed to find a different solution than we used last decade. Our solution was to adjust the vintage 2020 estimates to be consistent with the vintage 2021 using a process similar to how the intercensus estimates are created, but without using the 2020 census directly. The POP estimates for 2020 forward included information from the 2020 census, but our most recent estimates for the years 2017 through 2019 did not. What we did was bridge the 2017 to 2019 estimates to form a consistent time series with 2020 and 2021. This process made the controls and our 2017 to 2021 ACS 5-year estimates generally consistent with the 2020 census. Thus, for the 2017 to 2021 ACS 5-year, we formed the controls sourcing the vintage 2021 blended base estimates for the years 2020 and 2021, and adjusted vintage 2020 estimates for 2017 through 2019. Next slide, please. Okay, another update that we do annually is update various geographic areas around the country, as you heard Nate talk about at the beginning of the session. So these changes occur for various reasons, such as annexation, disincorporation, and geocoding updates. These changes can reduce the comparability of some geographic areas, but ensures that the most recent versions of geographic areas are used in our tabulation process. At this point, most ACS geographies reflect the 2020 census boundary changes. Some of the more recent changes include the new 2020 census tract definitions and census designated places, which were updated in the 2016 to 2020 ACS 5-year release. The zip code tabulation areas, or ZICTAs, were updated with 2020 census boundaries in the 2017 to 2021 ACS 5-year release last year. And finally, the public use microdata areas, or PUMAs, and urban areas were updated with 2020 based boundaries in the 2022 ACS 1-year release, which occurred on September 14th. Additionally, we have some geography updates in our 2022 ACS data releases, which include the 118th congressional districts, the 2022 state legislative districts, and finally, the Connecticut counties that are replaced with the 9 planning zones, which I will not discuss because I think that's been covered enough by my colleagues. Next slide, please. Okay, and so if you are interested in learning more about our geographies, we do have a page on that on our website. So I do want to take a moment to cover some high-level guidance on comparing ACS data, because this is a question we receive quite often. So the strength of the ACS is in estimating characteristic distributions. So the Census Bureau recommends that users compare population characteristics such as percents, means, medians, and rates, rather than estimates of population totals from the ACS. If you are looking for population totals, we recommend using the decennial census or the population estimates program. In general, the Census Bureau recommends that you compare similar period lengths. So for example, you're going to want to compare 1-year estimates to 1 year or 5-year to 5-year. So if your analysis is looking at a variety of geographies, some of which that receive 1-year estimates and some that receive 5-year, you're going to want to use 5-year so that your comparisons are consistent. We do not recommend comparing estimates from different period lengths, so you don't want to compare 1 year to 5-year. It's also important to keep in mind that all ACS data are estimates. We collect data from a sample of the population in the US and Puerto Rico, rather from the whole population. So there is a level of uncertainty around those estimates. So to help you interpret the reliability of the estimates, the Census Bureau publishes a margin of error, or MOE, for every ACS estimate. So unless you account for the MOEs, you cannot conclude that estimates are statistically different from one another. Instead, you will need to conduct statistical testing when making comparisons between estimates to check for any differences. Looking at estimates alone to decide if they are higher or lower than one another is not sufficient. You should feel free to compare estimates across geographies and population subgroups using ACS data, but you should not expect the ACS estimates to match decennial census counts or estimates from other surveys. So for example, do not expect ACS estimates to match CPS, that's the current population survey, income, poverty, or health insurance estimates. Our comparison guidance page provides broad information about comparing ACS estimates across ACS years, as well as comparing with the 2020 and 2010 census. So from the link on the page, you can find that guidance. Next slide, please. Oh, I think my slides got a little out of order. Apologize for that. Going back to geography really quickly, if you are interested in some more guidance about our geographic changes, I just wanted you all to have the URL to this slide. Next slide, please. Okay, back to comparison guidance. So here I'm showing you an image of the comparison guidance page that I referenced before. And so you can access specific guidance on comparing ACS data with other ACS estimates as well as censuses. You can also find guidance on comparing data for specific topics and subjects as well. Next slide. On the ACS website, you can also find data user resources by selecting the Guidance for Data Users tab on the left side of the ACS homepage. So an example of a resource available on the site is the ACS Data User Handbook series. These handbooks are provided in PDF format and they're downloadable. Each handbook is tailored to the needs of specific data users, such as federal agencies, journalists, and researchers, just to name a few. Each handbook contains real-world step-by-step case studies of ACS data uses. Another great resource is our recorded webinars page. This page contains recordings of our live webinars. Each presentation contains a video of the training, along with a copy of the PowerPoint slides and a transcript of the presentation. And they're a great way to train yourself and others on specific topics as they relate to the American Community Survey. Next slide, please. And finally, for users who have access to data but need more information to understand the tables and complete their analysis, we offer code lists, subject definitions, instructions for applying statistical testing, comparison guidance, and accuracy of the data in our technical documentation section. The technical documentation page, which is shown on this slide, can be found by going to census.gov/ACS and then selecting technical documentation in the left navigation of the page. And that is all I have, so I will pass this off to Michael Hawes.
Great, thank you, Nicole. So we have heard so far today about a number of methodology changes that may impact your uses of Census Bureau data. I'm going to cover another one, and that is some methodology changes that we have made to how we protect confidentiality in the data that we publish. We call this process disclosure avoidance. Next slide, please. So keeping the public's trust and protecting the confidentiality of the public's data is incredibly important for us here at the Census Bureau. This is a legal requirement for us under Title 13 of the U.S. Code, which protects the confidentiality of census records. But perhaps even more importantly than the legal requirements here are the fact that it's critical to our ability to collect and produce quality data in the first place. If the public didn't trust us to be able to adequately protect their information, they would be less willing to participate in our censuses and surveys to begin with. So this ability to safeguard the public's data, to have a culture of data stewardship, and to protect confidentiality in the data that we release is critical to us being able to fulfill our mission to produce quality data. Next slide, please. So we've used a variety of statistical methods over the decades to protect confidentiality in the data that we publish. For the decennial census, for 1970 and 1980 censuses in particular, we used a process called suppression, where we would just remove data, either individual cells or entire tables, if they didn't reflect a large enough underlying population. I often call this Swiss cheese data because it significantly impacts the coverage of the census statistics that you're getting. Beginning with 1990, however, we switched to a different mechanism where we were injecting noise into the data, noise or statistical noise, uncertainty into the data through a process called swapping, where we would essentially take entire households' records and swap them with the records of a household in a nearby geography. We did this for the 1990, 2000, and 2010 censuses, injecting noise through this swapping mechanism. Next slide, please. Well, disclosure risk is not static. With each passing year, improvements in technology and computing power and the proliferation of rich third-party data sources that could be leveraged in an attack against our published statistics continue to increase. And those increases lead to increased risk of disclosure and re-identification in the data products that we publish. So protecting confidentiality for us means being able to respond to and adapt to these increasing threats year over year. Next slide, please. So for the 2020 census, we recognized that the mechanisms, that swapping mechanism that we had used for the 1990, 2000, and 2010 censuses was no longer going to be sufficient to keep pace with these growing threats. So for 2020, for the 2020 census, we improved on the noise injection mechanism that we had previously used by employing a mathematical framework that's known as differential privacy. Now, differential privacy as this framework allows us to assess and quantify the disclosure risk, or conversely, the amount of protection that we're providing for each statistic that we publish. Now, it does this because every individual that is reflected in any statistic that we publish is going to contribute towards that statistic's value. And every statistic that you publish from a confidential data source is going to reveal or leak a tiny bit of confidential information in the process. So differential privacy as kind of a risk accounting framework allows us to assess each data subject's contribution to each of the statistics that we want to publish. And by assessing that contribution, we're then able to calibrate our noise injection, how much uncertainty we need to add into each of those statistics to limit how much information about each of our data subjects may leak or be revealed in the statistics that we publish. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, differential privacy is more of like a risk accounting framework than a disclosure avoidance mechanism per se, and there's no one way to implement a differentially private disclosure avoidance system. In fact, for the 2020 census, we've actually used a variety of differentially private algorithms in order to protect confidentiality, all within this broader privacy accounting framework. The highlights of which mechanisms we're using here are for the redistricting data that we published back in 2021, the demographic profile and the demographic and housing characteristics file. We used an algorithm called the top-down algorithm, or TDA. And this protected confidentiality by producing privacy-protected microdata that could then be ingested by our decennial tabulation systems. Our other data products, like the detailed DHCA, detailed DHCB, and supplemental DHC, are being protected using different differentially private algorithms that produce privacy-protected tabulations directly, kind of skipping that privacy-protected microdata step. Next slide, please. So the top-down algorithm, for example, which was used to protect the redistricting data and DHC files, at a very high level, kind of operates with kind of the following 5 steps. It ingests the confidential microdata from the 2020 census. It converts those into a functionally equivalent histogram, or essentially a set of all possible combinations of record attributes and counts of the number of individuals that meet all those for each geographic area. It then asks questions or queries of those confidential tallies, and adding a little bit of statistical noise or uncertainty into the results of each of those queries. So how many people with this combination of characteristics live in this block? How many people with that combination of characteristics live in that tract, etc. And it adds a tiny bit of statistically neutral noise to the result of each of those queries. Now, because each of those questions is independent of each other, and because the noise that's being added to or subtracted from each of those results is independent of each other, the results may not be consistent. If you, for example, ask the number of people in a particular county, and then the number of males in that county and the number of females in that county, and inject a tiny bit of noise to each of those 3 results, well, then adding your males and your females might not directly sum to the total number of people with those noisy answers. So then we take all of those results and put them through a process known as post-processing, which essentially reconciles all of those results to be internally and hierarchically consistent, so that all of your subcategories sum to the parent categories and all of your lower level geographies sum to the parent geography. Once all that post-processing is done, then the resulting privacy-protected records are converted back into microdata, privacy-protected microdata in this case, which can then feed into tabulation to become the redistricting and DHC data products. This was a very high and kind of simplified view of kind of what the top-down algorithm does. If you want the more technical documentation for this and an explanation for how it works, we do have a technical paper in the Harvard Data Science Review that goes through it in detail. Next slide, please. All right, so what does all this mean for your uses of census data? Well, one of the nice things about differentially private approaches to disclosure avoidance is it allows us to create a variety of tools that our data users can use to assess the fitness for use, or to assess the expected amount of uncertainty that you might see in any of the protected statistics that we're publishing. Next slide, please. So one of the best tools that you can use to assess whether the resulting data are going to be fit for your particular uses of decennial census data is a set of demonstration data products that we released this past spring. Essentially, what these demonstration data products are is we took 2010 census data and fed them through our 2020 census disclosure avoidance system, essentially allowing you to then see, okay, if we had applied differential privacy through the top-down algorithm to the 2010 census, what would the results have been? And you can compare those to what we published after the 2010 census, assessing the differences in the two mechanisms. Now, it's important to note that, remember, 2010, the data that were published after that were protected using that swapping mechanism of noise injection. So if you're doing direct comparisons between this demonstration data product suite and the 2010 published data, you will see two sources of error represented there. The error from swapping and the error from differential privacy, and you'll have to factor that into analysis. But it does provide you an excellent opportunity to assess the overall fitness for use of the resulting data. So this demonstration data product suite includes a number of useful components. We have a fact sheet that just explains kind of what was included in the suite and how the data were protected. We have an extensive array of detailed summary metrics. These are essentially accuracy measures for a wide variety of use cases for different tabulations at different levels of geography and for different geographic size categories. We have a privacy protected microdata file. This is the complete microdata, those privacy protected microdata output of the top-down algorithm that you can use to produce your own accuracy measures. We have tabulations from those data that are akin to the tabulations included in the redistricting and DHC files. We have the underlying parameterizations of the top-down algorithm, so you can see kind of how we were tuning the overall accuracy privacy balance within there. And then we have a noisy measurement file, which I'm not going to get much into, but that's kind of for more sophisticated researchers to go in and see essentially the unpost-processed noisy measurements, those noisy query answers, and generate unbiased estimates of quantities of interest. Next slide, please. So in addition to those 2010 demonstration data, which are an excellent way to assess fitness for use, we also have some direct 2020 accuracy measures that we generated by comparing the published 2020 DHC statistics that were protected using the top-down algorithm to the confidential 2020 census edited file counts, and then injecting just a tiny bit of noise to protect confidentiality in those results. These direct comparisons provide you an excellent ability to assess, yes, the overall level of accuracy of these statistics is within this certain range, and that is fit for use for my particular use case, for example. And you can find those available at this link here, which will be provided after the webinar. Next slide. We also have a series of disclosure avoidance briefs that are really helpful for data users that go into a lot of these fitness for use issues, as well as providing some guidance for how to essentially adapt your analyses to incorporate some of these kind of known sources of uncertainty from disclosure avoidance. We've got a brief on disclosure avoidance in the 2020 redistricting data. We have a brief that gets into why we made these changes to our methodology for confidentiality protection. And we have one on how the top-down algorithm works. And we have additional briefs that are currently in the works and that will be published over the coming months. Next slide, please. All right, so here is the contact info for our presenters today. We now have some time for some questions and answers, which I will try to moderate here. So I am looking at our presenters. Nathan, are you still on the line? We've got a question that I think you answered in the chat, but we'll answer it now. Relating to what coordinate reference system does the Census Bureau suggest using for projections with the shapefiles?
Hey, Michael, thank you for that. Yeah, I did provide the answer to Kevin in the chat, but just for the group's awareness, we're using GCS NAD 83. And then Kevin had an additional follow-up question regarding how we calculate state land area, and I'm working to track that down, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible on that.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Okay, we got another one here for Ali. Asking about the race coding. So what about people with one race, but multiple origins within that race group? For example, someone with grandparents from 4 different countries, for example, Polish, Irish, Ukrainian, and Italian.
That's a great question. Thank you. So if someone wrote in 4 different responses, we would code all 4 of those different responses. We code up to 6 responses per write-in area. So someone who wrote in Polish, Italian, Irish, and Ukrainian in the white write-in area, for example, would be counted in the alone or in any combination population counts for Polish, Italian, Irish, and Ukrainian.
Great. And we got another set of questions here. I'll try to go through these kind of piecemeal for you, Allie. Given the more detailed responses on race and ethnicity in the 2020 census, how are the individual, like the detailed race groups, aggregated into the major race groups?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of give an overview response to all 4 of these questions, kind of
great.
all at once, because they're kind of summed up in a piecemeal response of data comparisons between 2020 and 2010 census data really should be made with caution, taking into account the improvements that we did make to the Hispanic origin and race questions and the way we code what people tell us. So as I mentioned, for example, we're coding more terms than ever before. We used to code only 30 characters. We now take up to 200. So we're taking more responses than ever. Accordingly, the data from the 2020 census shows different but reasonable and expected distributions from the 2020 census, particularly for the white alone population, the some other race alone or in combination population, and the multiracial population, especially for people who identify as both white and some other race. And as for comparing maybe those more detailed responses, we do have guidance in our technical documentation for the 2020 detailed DHCA, because it's got a lot of differences from 2010, for example. As I mentioned, we now have write-in responses for the white, Black, or African American, and some other race responses, which we did not have in the 2010 census. And then, as I mentioned, we made some changes to the Asian and NHPI write-in areas and responses, such as we now have distinct codes for Chamorro versus Guamanian. So please definitely take into account all of these changes and caution when we mention that. And then lastly, I do want to say, I plop in the chat, you'll see 4 different links. But one of them does share our iterations list. And so that shows you all of the detailed groups that roll up into those major race and ethnicity categories. For example, it shows you all of the groups from the white racial category that have detailed data in the detailed DHCA.
Great, thank you. All right, so we had a number of questions asking if the recording of the webinar and if the slides will be made available. Yes, they will. Angie put that info in the Q&A, but I'll just read it here. So the webinar recording and the slides will be available within the next 2 to 3 weeks and will be posted on the Census Bureau website in our webinars section, and you can get the link in the Q&A there. Oh, and it was just put in the chat as well. So, all right, question for Nicole. What is the likelihood of changing the ACS questions around broadband technology possession to reflect ownership of tech versus access? We know access is not static for lower income, so how can we make the questions more specific? Clarity around this is important when considering undercounts and advocacy around digital inclusion as super social determinant of health.
That's a great question. I can't really speak to when that question would change specifically, but let me start just broadly talking about how each question on the ACS has a federal need, with a demonstrated need for both the frequency and the level of geography provided by the ACS. So typically federal agencies would propose either new content or modified content on the ACS. And approximately every 5 years, we do go through the process of what we call a content test in order to evaluate changes to questions, whether that be modifications, new questions, the wording, etc. And then we do rigorous testing to ensure that the questions on the form itself are reflecting the data needs that are being asked for. So for that specific question, I don't really have a good answer, but I did want to note, I did put in the chat a link to one of what we call our Why We Ask pages, we do ask about computer ownership in addition to internet use. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, because I do think we have a component of it. And from that page, you can actually select a dropdown. You can see the questions as they appear on the form, and then a sample of some of the statistics that come from those questions, as well as why they were asked on the form. But if you need any additional information, please let me know. I'm happy to help you out.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. All right, I've got a few questions for Christine Hartley here. So the first one, what is the ETA on the 2010 to 2020 intercensal estimates?
Thank you for that question. So at this present time, we are still waiting on the file that we need to serve as the endpoint for the 2010 to 2020 intercensal estimates. And based on the expected receipt of that file, we're thinking that the product will be completed at the end of the summer of 2024, early fall 2024.
Great. And another one here, will post-2020 census projections be based on the true census figures, the disclosure avoidance created file, or the 2020 estimates described earlier? The questioner here said, you're a bit confused as it seems 2020 would have 3 different values.
That's a very good question. And it actually, I would say it depends on the product that you're referring to. So for example, the population estimates program annual vintage estimates that we put out are currently created from, depending on the level of geography that you're looking at, an April 1st, 2020 census value that integrates results from the census with other estimates products. It's a blend. Each year we're looking to revise that estimates base and potentially pull in more data from the census, but it wouldn't actually be a base that matches the census data that you can get on census.gov. At the sub-county levels, we are using the results of the census with a small amount of differentially private noise infused. So for cities and towns, we're starting with the household and group quarters populations from the census, and then adding a little bit of noise, and we're using that to build our estimates. For actual population projections, we're on the verge of putting out a new series of the national population projections, and these are based off of our estimates. So they start from our July 1st, 2022 estimate. So it would still technically have that base I described, which kind of combines the different data sources to create an April 1st, 2020 estimate. So there are, as you mentioned, numerous values for April 1st, 2020, and it can be a little bit tricky to figure out which one is best suited to your needs. But I think that for the most part, all of the products that we're creating are adhering to similar disclosure avoidance guidelines. And we are always available to help you kind of, I guess, filter through that and figure out that, which product best meets your needs. So you can always reach out, and we can make sure that, you're using the best product for whatever you're working on.
Great, thank you, Christine. Okay, we got another question here that I think was from my portion, although I am gonna ask Ellie to also kind of weigh in since it deals with her topics about the race categorization as well. So the question was, DHC and DHCA, are they comparable even though they have different noise methods, different mechanisms for protecting confidentiality? So that is correct that the DHC was protected using the top-down algorithm, and the detailed DHCA was protected using the SafeTab-P differentially private algorithm, which are different mechanisms for injecting noise. So there are going to be inconsistencies between those two files, but it is important to recognize that the redistricting and DHC data are only disaggregating by the major race types. So like white, Black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, etc. Whereas the detailed DHCA is not using those major race types, it's actually using the detailed and regional subcategories, which wouldn't necessarily sum up to the major race category anyway if people didn't fill in the write-in lines. Allie, did I get that correct?
Yeah, you said everything I was thinking of saying. So I do want to emphasize that the DHC and the detailed DHCA have different content. As Michael mentioned, the DHC is those major race groups like Black or African American, Asian, Hispanic, or Latino, whereas the detailed DHCA provides those disaggregated detailed race groups such as Irish, German, English, etc. And so they don't have quite the same content. And as he mentioned, were you to sum up all of, for example, the detailed groups that are in the Black or African American category, you wouldn't expect them to actually equal the count provided in the DHC for Black or African American because they have different privacy protection mechanisms. And that is one of the limitations between the data products. And if you're interested in learning more, that is described more in detail in the technical documentation in Chapter 5 that goes over data limitations and guidance for using the detailed DHCA.
So we've got a question here asking if these changes, and it's not clear which changes in particular are being referenced, whether it's the disclosure avoidance changes or changes to the race question or any of the changes to pop estimates, et cetera. Will these changes have implications for NHANES? If so, what would those be? I'm actually going to ask if Angie wants to chime in on that. She may have more insight into the question.
Yeah, sure. I can respond to that. So NHANES is run out of the National Center for Health Statistics, or NCHS. We do have a CDC-wide work group where we're talking about some of these changes and implications, but we haven't specifically talked about NHANES. I can put my email address in the chat if you want to reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you with somebody who might be able to help with that.
Great, thank you, Angie. And I'm not seeing any additional questions here, but if you have any remaining questions, we do still have a couple minutes left. Just type them into the chat window, or sorry, into the Q&A window, and we can get someone to answer them. Give folks a moment to add in any additional questions. Well, I am not seeing any new questions coming in. So I think with that, I will turn things back over to Angie to close us out. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Michael. Again, I just wanted to thank the census speakers for presenting to us today and sharing all of this information with us. And thanks again to all of you for attending and asking your questions. Have a great week.
This concludes today's session. You may disconnect at this time. Have a good afternoon, everyone.